Om Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we left off on verse 23, I think. And just to summarize the personality traits. So we're looking at these personality traits as a measure of our own spiritual status, but not anybody else's. Though we gain a perception of what things are when we see this, of what's going on around us. But the idea is our own spiritual growth. And that's what will change the picture for us. So we started with what was Sattvik, Rajasik, Tamasik, knowledge. You have to have knowledge, depending on what sort of knowledge you have within yourself or have gained, is how you're going to be relating to your world. So if your knowledge is Tamasik, that's what you're going to get. If it's Rajasik, that's what it's going to be. That's what you're going to project. If it's Sattvik, that's what it's going to be. You don't need to see what's going on outside, but that's the environment you might create. It's really internal. So the knowledge then enables the type of action you perform. So your actions are backed by some form of knowledge or another, whether it be Sattvik, Rajasik, Tamasik, and determines what type of character actor you are. So this is what we're looking at in the this first section of the personality chart, personality traits, thought textures. So when we looked at Sattvik knowledge, that which sees divinity in the diversity, that ability to do that is a skill. You might be able to do it in some aspects when it's joyful, but the ability to do it when it's not quite that is a skill. It's a technique which we need to learn. Practice, as actually Swamiji puts forward. So it's not passive, it's quite assertive, the path of Sattva. So Sattvik knowledge sees the divinity in the diversity. Rajasic knowledge, just the opposite. You see, you have to see it for yourself, observe yourself or observe others in the relation, whatever you're doing, how the actions play out, how the whole thing plays out. So Rajasic knowledge sees diversity everything, sees separateness everywhere, sees division everywhere, makes division, makes separateness in order to so-called thrive, but that thriving has a limit. Whereas in that sattva, that knowledge which is offered in sattvic knowledge has no limits. It's to get to that infinite. Rajasic knowledge has a limit to the material. It's really what you can grab. That quick fix. Sometimes the quick fix seems a bit longer, so we get deceived. Tamasic knowledge, out of delusion, sees a part as a whole, where we don't collect any facts, where we're totally ignorant, but we make a decision. We don't really care because it's just going with the herd, that instinct of not really thinking about it. It's not even animalistic, it's just deluded. You see it all upside down, and you're confirming that this is the right way by just a little part of information. So Tamasic knowledge. Then we went on to, anybody, any question before we move from this part? Tamasic. So Sattvik action. We began last week. Performs obligatory actions, those which are our routine, that we know, we've understood what we've got to pursue in view of our own higher ideals. Every day and occasional. So routine duties and occasional. So this needs a lot of assessment, preferably first thing in the morning hours, to sit with and reflect on what are my obligations in life? What am I supposed to be doing in relation to my world to evolve to that truth? It's not based on likes or dislikes. It's not after the fruit. There's the intrinsic value which is within you that drives you to get to the truth. It's not after anything material as such. It understands that you require and use the material to move on your path, but it's not stuck with that by far. It's effortless. The speed is like lightning, but it's effortless. Whereas in Rajasic action, in actual fact, we're about to start, it's totally the opposite. So you can make an effortless stroke on a painting and it's just right. You know that's what it's supposed to be. It doesn't come without preparation. You may write something which is accurate to the time, to the place, and the well-being of the whole. And it doesn't take any effort. You know what it is. It's clear. There's no thought before or after. It's clear and it's done. Effortless. Whereas the other one, which we're about to do now, is totally the opposite. So before we start on 24, is there any question in any of this so far? Has anybody started their chart? Okay. And you remember, you don't do your chart for anybody but yourself. So now and again, I note down, okay, how do we up this?
My failure, I don't think I've sent out the chart to everyone. I put it into the WhatsApp group, but you can make your own, but the one we have might be helpful.
Yeah, the one we have is difficult to write lots of information, but it's just a guideline. So you'd have to perhaps elaborate yours to suit you. And then you make your own percentages of what you think it is. So yeah, but it's just a good guideline to do it. 24.
Yattu kamepsuna karma sahankarena va punaha kriyate bahulayasam tadrajasam udahritam.
Sam, if you could read the verse.
Apologies. 24. But action done by longing for desired object or with egoism, again with much effort, is declared Rajasika.
So, done with longing for desire. So there's a real push of something that you want. Egoism, ahamkara. You feel that you want it, there's a craving for it, and there's a resistance to anything else, any even obligation sometimes, because you want that so much. So you feel you want that, you're obliged to have it, and that egoism, I can do it, I am the doer. There's a difference between I can do it for a higher value. You push yourself towards a higher value in the sense there's a grace in it and there's a pursuit to truth. This is something you want to get out of it, grab. So I'm the doer. Great effort, because it's focused not on the whole, but in your individual value. It takes a lot of effort. Declared Rajasik. A lot of desires backing it. You see, when you pursue a higher ideal, there's the desire for the higher ideal, but it's not being shoved by what you can get out of it in the sense of a lower value, of a greed, or something that agitates you that needs to be fulfilled. It's just a pursuit of the truth. It's not that craving. So when it's Rajasic, you feel a craving, a longing for a particular type of thing to get done, your desire. It very much operates on likes and dislikes and not on obligation. So the thought of what you ought to do often isn't there. It's, I like to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to avoid that at all cost. I think everybody must have heard the quote, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. You have to assess it a little bit and think about it. You want something so badly that you rush for it. Then later on you realize, I shouldn't have done that. I should have done this. But the push of that desire pushes you into it. So it's not to say that when we have a desire for something higher, that we shouldn't have some speed in its pursuit. But it's that craving which one ought not to have. The speed is good, but the crave for it and a lack of analysis or assessment in that pursuit, the lack of objectivity kills it. That resistance to the world, but something you want to get done. Egoism. It also creates inferiority complexes and superiority complexes. That egoism. You think you're better than somebody, or you don't feel that you're able to pursue something. You feel inferior. Everybody else knows better. That Rajas in you takes great effort. The opposite being effortlessly, that refinement, the subtle intellect backing it, Sattvik action. So you have to take your own examples from life. We recently watched the tennis and the final, talking of men's final, women's final too. You just see the way they hit effortlessly. If you've ever held a tennis racket and played tennis, those strokes to just get it in the right place is something. Then when you've got it in the right place for your parent to come and receive it and send it back is another thing. I'm talking about bat and ball tennis. So that speed and that grace which pair play effortlessly. Or grand painters, one stroke. Turner used to go to his exhibitions before the exhibition and put one stroke on. It's believed to be said he'd put the last part of the painting on, just because he knew exactly what he wanted to do. It comes from preparation. Have you ever seen any Caravaggio paintings? Can look him up if you don't know who it is. When TV, gadgets, photography was not available, this fellow's images made 2D canvases look three-dimensional effortlessly. So it takes, that effort takes skill, it takes practice, it takes preparation, and it's not rushing in, pushed by desire, which is Rajasik, the opposite. Much effort, keep doing it. You don't actually get what you want. It's not thought through. It's not backed by knowledge of high values, but backed by knowledge too of the material, quick fixes. You need 10 times the amount of information to get it moving, to hold the attention of people. Rajasik. There's some adverts which come on the computer before you want to watch something. You may even see it before you watch the YouTube video. It's so jarring to watch. There's so much action. It's so frivolous. But for another person, it may be quite entertaining. Keep the attention because it needs that rajas. It needs that aggression. It's not effortless though. Tremendous effort. Vidya.
How do we relate? You know, earlier we were speaking of Swadharma and doing our Swadharma, and the likes and dislikes that we're talking about in Rajasic action. So if I'm doing my Swadharma, is it not my likes that I'm doing? And therefore, is it classified as Rajasic, or is there a subtle variation to Swadharma and the likes and dislikes in a Rajasic action?
So Swadharma is your innate bent, your own nature. So what's your swa, your essential nature, dharma, nature, which each one of us has got to follow, and each one is an individual, and we need to assess what our Swadharma, you might be Swadharma, your Swadharma might be to paint. So you've got to do that. There's no point becoming a mechanic. You won't fulfill those desires. So that's generally based in the initial stages. When you're assessing that, you might assess what you keeps reoccurring, and that can be based on what you like to do and what you don't like to do. You're assessing it very generally on that. You know, you might like when you might feel very comfortable doing something, say you're a painter, but you can't go and be a mechanic. It's just jarring to your mind, or vice versa. So you've chosen a like there. In choosing that like needs to be coupled with, to make it Sattvik, coupled with the higher ideal and be backed with the subtle intellect. But when it's just on an everyday basis, or whatever you might have to do in your vocation, that still is coupled with the higher ideal and subtle intellect in its pursuit. But generally speaking, when the desires are flooding through, there may be Rajasic activity required in order to step it up. But as you start to refine it, that Rajas becomes less about grabbing what's outside and more about, it's less about doing the action to refine the thought, but more about the thought refining the action. If that makes sense. So you are then acting with your obligatory duties in line with your swadharma, in line with your obligatory duties. You're not trying to figure out how to get your swadharma to be an obligation as such. Use that subtle intellect. So one's using gross intellect at its best when it's Rajasic in the world. You might create more desires that way. But the truest way to refine yourself is using that sattva, but you're using subtle intellect, backing your activities which are of your nature. And you don't really care whether you're successful or not, but you do keep going on that truth, using that nature to speed you along. And eventually that nature won't have any bearing on your pursuit of truth. You'll just be in that line doing it. But if somebody asks you something to do as a collective, which is not in your nature, as swadharmic, you'll be able to do it because your nature is to follow truth. So you will be a predominance in whatever your nature is, but you can pick up things because it's pursuing truth. So it may be that, it may be that to fix things mechanically is not in your nature. But because you're so endowed with following your nature as perhaps a painter, you're so fluid with it, you can divert a little bit to go and do that to match up to the truth, because you're always using subtle intellect. You can, because the package comes with all different things to get to the truth. Swadharmic nature just speeds it up for you to get there. Paradharmic holds you back and creates more vasanas and leads you away. Often people follow paradharmic natures because of the material stance that it earns them money, but it doesn't earn them a true wealth of happiness. It may temporarily fix them, and because everybody is doing the same thing, they feel temporarily satiated, but they keep the chase on, which is exhausting. You've got to be at peace with your mind now to maneuver with truth. If it's always with a chase, to fix it, chase, to fix it, mind's constantly agitated. So does it make sense? So Rajasic tires you. Sattvik fuels you with energy. Rajasic is never ending till death doesn't part. Sattva's refinement is smooth and death has no consequence in it, physical death. Not interested. Live or die, you do the optimum now. You fear death if you've not lived well. You don't fear death if you've lived well, you just get on with it. Come what may, it's progression. Yes, it's okay. Sam.
Rajasika karma is action springing from desire and longing for fruit, or out of egoism, undertaken with great effort. Contrary to Sattvika action, performed effortlessly. Sattvika action goes along with your inner conscience. It flows freely, demands less effort. Rajasika action, being selfish, self-centered, runs against your conscience. One therefore needs to put in more effort to execute Rajasika action.
How does that work, anybody? How does it work if it's not with your conscience and it's self-centered? Why does it mean you got to put in more effort? What's happening there? Anyone? Vidya?
Because of this line where it says it is selfish, self-centered, and runs against your conscience. Conscience being Brahman, Atman, we understood it to be predominantly Sattvik and pure. So when it's contradicting that, there is always a struggle, an uphill struggle to do Rajasic actions. And as you just alluded to a while ago, Parulji, where you said it keeps you constantly in that astira chanchala motion, where your mind is constantly, swaying between good and bad, likes and dislikes. So therefore, it doesn't offer the stability, that the outcome of the action doesn't offer stability. Plus also there is bondage in Rajasic action, because it's coming from a point of egoistic desires and action-oriented and fruit-oriented, sorry. So when it's fruit-oriented, you're expecting something, and when it doesn't happen or it doesn't go to your plan, then you're disappointed, and then it becomes a vicious cycle. And hence why it goes against the nature of our self. Biggest.
So anything against the self keeps you agitated, on the chase. Yeah, exhausted. Anything in the direction of the subtle intellect. Even if you've got lots of desires, you've got a fixed ideal which is not of self-interest. Even relatively speaking, it's just a greater identification than you, yourself, or your family. Even your community. There's a little ease of mind, a satiation of that astra, that movement, that monkey in you, going here to here. There's something, movement of that ideal, focus on that ideal. The biggest ideal being self-realization or a self, or something, forget that word, something universal, encompassing the whole, that you move in harmony with your world. Releases you from the stress. Ego is in resistance to your world and creates that agitation. Yeah, good. Let's read the next. Anybody else? Actually, anybody else have a contribution?
I just had a question.
Yeah.
In terms of these verses 24, 25, 26, I feel they're sort of framed in the reference of appealing action, or action which is attractive, which are sort of positive actions. But what about the actions which you feel are without ego, or the decision to make those actions without ego, but actually you find them very challenging? So, for example, it could be taking care of an elderly parent or something like that. Is it possible to take care of an elderly parent, performing certain actions you find unpleasant, and that's still being Sattvik, or is that Rajasic? And if you're saying that it can't be Sattvik if it's unpleasant, what would the proposal be practically, and how do you deal with those kind of conflicts?
So Sattvik action isn't necessarily, the action per se may not necessarily be pleasant. We're coming to that Sattvik and Rajasic happiness. Pleasant, it's poison. It feels poisonous in the beginning. It feels very difficult to pursue Sattvik happiness, but it's like the right thing, the right connection, the right harmony to do it. So you got to do it. So Sattvik is just not acting on like or dislike. It's acting objectively in what you know you've got to do. So often one can't do what one's got to do because of the flood of desires one has of their own nature, which becomes the obstacle of what one's got to do. So the minute you pitch upon a value, though you may not feel you want to do it, but you pitch upon a value, that's helping your growth. You know, whatever you have to do that you don't like to do, that's helping your growth. And you also appreciate what you've got in relation to the situation that you've got to pursue. You know, as if, say, for instance, it's a parent, it doesn't even have to be a parent. Anybody that you relate to, and you might find it tricky, is because of one's own flood of desires that are being barred, because you've got to spend time in a different direction than you want to, you like, or maybe your own ideals, higher ideals. But it's when one starts to encompass the whole scenario. You are where you are in the situation you are, maybe because of your good and bad past actions that have consequences now. You may have to nullify some of them to move forward by putting in the effort, or you may just be, it's all there to take you on your ride of growth. So once one can accept that, it's not a good or a bad, it's an understanding and appreciation of that's part and parcel of your sadhana. So it may not be a parent, it may be just somebody you knew or you know. If it's a parent, there's an obvious obligation that normally the parent has given you what you are now to some degree. So you feel obliged, even if you felt a parent didn't give you what you wanted, or where you've got to. When you understand it, there's some relationship which can educate you and grow you in the most difficult of scenarios, which actually it's like the stiffer the game, the better the play. The more difficult it is, the more it grows you and stretches you. So anything outside of your desire set of maybe you feel is swadharmic, it's that relationship. How do you see the divinity in whatever the diversity is? When it's close and there's a close proximity, there's an easy possibility that you get neutralized to the scenario or the persons around you. So you don't have appreciation for them. You know, if you live with somebody, you get neutralized by them. You don't have any, not by them, with them. So you don't have any appreciation or value for them. But when you're separated from them, you then begin to appreciate, I learned that from them. That was so lovely. That was so endearing. That was such a purity of love. But when you're sometimes with the person, however much you like them or love them, there can be a lack of appreciation. And when there's difficult things and decisions to do and make, it becomes almost impossible. But you need a bit of breathing space, and you need to sit with it early hours and think, to gain that appreciation, to see that divinity in each one of us. It's tricky when you get neutralized. Sometimes you might feel like...
Yeah, I suppose my question is that there seems to be an inherent conflict which isn't adequately dealt with in the Gita, which is, if, for example, I appreciate I'm sort of skipping a couple of verses, but if you say you take a Sattvik course of action which aligns completely with your conscience and your Swadharma, well, perhaps not your Swadharma, but it aligns with your conscience, but you find it physically painful to carry out every day, would that fall out as Sattvik action? And because otherwise, would you not build emotional resentment? So I'm just interested in how that conflict might be resolved.
You might well build a resentment when you don't have knowledge because it keeps spiraling down as though it's against you. So you're building a solid ego that it's against what I'm supposed to be doing. But when you up it with knowledge of the universality of things, and you see that you're just that part or spoke in it, that whole wheel of life, you gain an appreciation of all the things that you have, which soften the blow of some of the things which you find difficult to do. So the resentment keeps getting chopped down. The resentment is only acquired when your desire is not being met. There's something stopping your desire. So it becomes Rajasic if there's no higher ideal for something that you're going for. Anything in the beginning where you're pitching up on some value takes effort, and that effort and preparation feels tremendous and slightly Rajasic. But what prevents it from being Rajasic is your inner conscience, which is placed on a bigger ideal. If it's placed on an ideal to grab something for oneself or one's immediate surrounds, the family, whatever, it can fall down very quickly. But when it's just to fall in sync with the whole, you keep breaking down your barrier of resentment, and actually you get the strength to see things with more of a pinch of salt where it's hurting you, and more of where it's running you smoothly. It's, even if you take it very simply, you know, when you start any activity and you're not endowed with the strength or the skill to do it, it's very difficult and you may want to give up. But say, like if you're playing a sport and you have no skill in it, it's difficult. But the fact that you persist with a bigger ideal that you want to play smoothly and enjoy it, slowly, slowly you'll build it up, and it builds up your own stamina, physically and mentally. We're going the other way around. Taking in knowledge builds up your stamina with that constant reflection. It breaks down the desire, that resentment, so you don't waste time in the anxiety of that resentment. You can do, perhaps, you can skillfully match up where you might be able to do your desire as well as your obligation. It's all falling in alignment. You know, sometimes some of the things that we take up a lot of time thinking about, if we can just focus on doing it, it gets resolved very quickly and move on. And even if it's not perfect, it doesn't matter. It will get perfected if we just keep on putting in the effort with a global picture. It takes a consistency of purpose to do it, and the guts to do it, in fact, and not follow the herd. The guts to focus on something bigger, to cut the resentment. So yes, it may seem one's vasanas are Rajasic, and largely they are. The thing is to direct them to something more Sattvik and just understand and appreciate all that one has each time. It's tricky and it needs work. But before you know it, it's like you can't run 10 yards and then you can run a mile. You can't run 5 miles, but then with practice, you can run 5. Then you look back and you think, what was the issue? I can do this. Why couldn't I run 10 yards before? So the mindset, change the mindset. The desires are there. Nobody's saying you shouldn't fulfill your desires. It's just the direction of where you're placing it, which allows you to, it's elastic, allows you to encompass some of the things that are difficult to do. And it keeps cutting down resentment. If everything is part of you, how can you resent it? Some things you have to, you know, prioritize, understood. You may not be able to serve one lot of people because you've got another obligation with a bigger value. But you may be able to allocate your time so you serve all the things that you need to. So that takes reflection of what you are supposed to be doing and what you're not supposed to be doing. It takes assessment, early hours. I'm not sure if that's what you're thinking about. It takes a powerful assessment in your morning hours to really think, should I be doing this? Should I not be doing it? Is this wasting my time? Or is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Is this going too slow? Or is this going without thought and we're rushing it? There's all sorts of things which you have to assess. Do I need to be patient here and I'm getting fed up of it? Or can I extend my patience so it gets done smoothly without, it takes a lot of stamina, but that's the preparation of this sort of knowledge. This knowledge gives you that preparation. It looks very different in the early hours in the morning, this knowledge. It's far, far more perceptive. Later on in the day, it all looks Rajasic. The Sattvik knowledge, it looks Rajasic. That's the interesting thing. I don't know if that's okay. If there's anything, please. See, what you're asking is that refinement of what happens to us. It's very difficult to see how you refine it. And in the morning, it does a fair good trick. Let's read a little more.
Rajasika action is also based on ego. Ego relates to the past. Memory of past sustains ego. In Rajasika action, therefore, the mind goes into the past while acting in the present. Likewise, the longing for the object of desire, fruit of action, carries the mind into the future. Rajasika action is burdened with worry of past and anxiety for future. That causes strain, stress, fatigue. An adult with all his strength complains of fatigue, whereas a child with little strength bristles with activity, effervesces with cheer. The simple reason for this paradox is that the child has neither worry of past nor anxiety for future.
So, Rajasic, it consumes your energy. So in the time you've consumed your energy, you may as well just done the thing that you're not sure you want to do, if it's the right thing. You've assessed it. Or, try it out. If it's a mistake, then correct it. But with that alertness of something bigger. Consumes your energy. Makes resistance. All the thoughts and conditionings of your past, you can't get rid of the whole lot, but you can assess it and move out of that stuckness. 25.
Anubandham kshayam himsam anapekshya cha paurusam mohadharabhyate karma yattata mam samuchyate.
Dharma, if you could read this.
An action undertaken from delusion, regardless of the consequence, loss, injury, and ability, is called tamasika.
So tamasika, undertaken from delusion. You don't know what you're doing, it's in total confusion. So we might get a general impression that lots of people are deluded. Everybody's deluded but oneself. I'm not deluded, but everybody else is. That's how we feel. We don't even realize it if we are deluded ourselves. Without having any concern or consideration, anapeksha, or ability to perform what you've got to do, without the capacity, you might take on an action and not realize you can't do it, but you've just got a solid desire that you want to do that in some ways. Or you just may not think about it. Everybody else is doing that, you go and do it too. So it's a sadhana to step back, and the whole sadhana is step back and observe yourself. You're not really there to impose or correct anybody else. If you observe and develop your own self, then perhaps there's a little bit of a capacity to do something in your world which is flourishing, which is in harmony with your world. But with delusion, the idea that you're not concerned of what's going to happen. People get into all sorts of things. You have kids, you don't even know how to look after them. I've seen it quite a few times where the parents don't know how to look after the child. They do all the things to get the child to love them instead of offering the child love because of their insecurities. So the lack of their own development, they're hoping that something outwards will cater to them instead of the other way around, that attachment. Could be anything. That's just an easy example which you see sometimes. So somebody could be bright in one area, gross intellect, but really not be able to relate in any other areas. So there's no thought of developing the personality. You just follow blindly everything. No clarity. A mad example is you go to play tennis and you hope that in 6 weeks of playing tennis, you hope to be a Wimbledon champion. It doesn't work like that. But you might hope. So you don't look at the effort the effort which is required to become that. It's delusional if you don't understand that correlation. But we do it in far more complex things, complex thought processes which harm us. We don't look after our health, our well. We don't look after our capacity to what we can do. We think about things far ahead of what we can do rather than what we're able to do immediately to build on. We rush ahead. We're deluded in thinking that this is all right. Not prepared to put in the efforts. We don't know what efforts to put in. I'm thinking of a person who I have knowledge of who's addicted the chap wants to have a family, but he can't even go and do his own shopping. There's some disconnect there. There's an illness going on. So not seeing the consequences, not able to see the consequences, don't see the problem. So you might even start a role with the best intentions, but you're not actually seeing the whole picture of what the outcome of or what's necessary in that path. And follow the herd with a push. So when one takes something up, you may not know everything about what the consequences are going to be, but at least assess. At least sit down and assess what is the cause, what is the effect, to the extent you can. Keep assessing so it builds that clarity. You're not responsible for anything. You don't care about anybody else. Just want what you want. No thinking. You don't care if it ruins your wealth, your health, your reputation. You want to do something. You do it without any regard. With no bother about anybody else. A real easy example is when there was a crash in 2008. Those people running the show didn't consider anybody, the whole world around, except themselves. It didn't happen overnight. It's a long, long process. That selfishness. Let's read it.
Tamasika karma is action arising out of delusion, from a state of confusion. Also, without taking into consideration one's ability to perform the action, not concerned about the consequence of execution, and disregarding loss incurred or injury caused by it.
So you just have to check it when you pursue something impulsively. Let's read it.
One may be genuine, sincere in executing an action, but fail to evaluate one's ability, capacity to perform it. Imagine an aged tennis player suddenly inspired to compete in Wimbledon and win the trophy for his country. However devoted and patriotic the veteran may be, he is deluded as to his capacity to achieve it. Such an action is deemed tamasika.
So you may get some idea in your mind that you can do X, but you're not in the capacity by far. And let's continue.
An action becomes tamasika also when there is no regard for its consequence, unmindful of repercussion, heedless of outcome. Like a person smuggling contraband goods across a country, driving when intoxicated, losing temper against an employer.
So you've really got to think carefully of what the consequences are to what you do. And that's, you have to have a bit of foresight, because sometimes we just jump in without thinking, what is it? What's the purpose? Will it achieve? It's not that you're getting hooked on the fruit or anything. It's just a strategic or calculated assessment of what you've got to do. Is it worth pursuing that or not? If not, drop it, move to what you ought to do. But you've got to assess, otherwise it's like you're just running with the heard the wind sways you and sways you another way next. Nothing gets done or moves in the right direction. Let's read it next.
Also action undertaken without regard to loss incurred thereby, loss of wealth, health, reputation, or other asset that outweighs the gain accruing from such action. Such careless venture, indifferent towards loss incurred, would fall under Tamasika category.
And when your mind is impulsive, you don't think, just let your emotions run. You don't realize what the one action can finish everything off. Tamasic action. King Lear's one action killed him off and others off too. He didn't acknowledge. He acknowledged his two daughters, which were flattering him, but he didn't acknowledge the grace of the daughter who was truthful to him. It landed him in the end in everybody in a very difficult situation and death. One action can also lose your reputation or your health. You have to assess what happens. This last paragraph.
Lastly, Tamasika karma includes irresponsible action which ignores injury caused to others or oneself. Action indifferent towards harm caused.
So, we don't want to see sometimes what is tamasic because it suits the way we like to do things. It's quite blind in our world. Indifferent to the pain or suffering that an animal feels just from the human palate. Tamasic. Tamasic. Don't care for anything but yourself. Can't acknowledge it. But it happens every day. And so many things. This one. Let's go to next week. Hari Om.